So earlier this year, I wanted to start a mini review series where I shortly talk about games I recently finished. I rewrote this script a total amount of 6 times now, 4 times of which it ended up being too long, and twice because I found the script to be too boring. So instead, time for some exquisite Eurobeat. Mass Effect 1 is a game where you play John Shepard, Commander Shepard, and you gotta blast your way through hundreds of enemies to stop a new emerging threat. This game features great cinematography, a great soundtrack, great art design, good writing with excellent writing for the detailed lore, but mediocre moment-to-moment gameplay that ties everything together, and as long as you overlook some minor annoyances, and the macro in its entirety, then you'll probably like this game. 6 out of 10 and wholeheartedly recommended. I'm talking of 3 points for gameplay annoyances and 1 point because of its rather lackluster side quests.
Mass Effect 2!
Woo! I love this game, 8 out of 10 and also recommended. In my opinion, it's the best game BioWare has ever made. In my previous script, this section alone took 2 full pages, so roughly 6 minutes of video. Long story short, it has even better writing in every regard outside of lore entries in comparison to the first game. The gameplay is now fully enjoyable, although it has been heavily streamlined. The level design is better, the art design and cinematography are even more impressive, and although it's not a game without its flaws, it is by far the best thing to come out of the Mass Effect franchise as a whole, in my opinion. What this game has in comparison to many others is emotion. You can finally fully immerse yourself in the universe of Mass Effect, and so far, it is the only game in the franchise that achieved that, in my opinion, once again. I would say that this is the worst game to come out of the franchise as a whole, but unfortunately, Mass Effect Andromeda exists. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the game that killed all interest I could have had for the franchise for 9 years. I played this game at release and I hated it. Like really, really hated it. So this is my first playthrough since its release, which also means this is the first time that I experienced the DLC, as well as the extended ending. So let me say this right off the bat so that we get this out of the way. I dislike half of the game's total writing, like half of every single piece of dialogue, half of all lore entries, half of everything when it associates to writing. I cannot stand it. I really dislike most of the new characters. The story, the ending in particular, are still almost unbearable for me. I really don't think it's good in any way. The level design is worse. The art design is less consistent and less detailed. The overall variety in content, like multiple hub worlds, has been killed. And this game falls flat as the finale of a story-driven trilogy, in my opinion. And I think it's a very justified one. Now for the positives. 2 things really push this game ahead of its predecessor. And that is the refined combat system and the soundtrack. That soundtrack is a goddamn masterpiece. Everything else though, let's just say I would have preferred it if Mass Effect 3 was just the Citadel DLC and nothing else. Honestly, I would have had more fun. Nonetheless, just because I hate this game doesn't mean that I cannot appreciate its qualities. And despite me doing so by biting my lips, I give the game a 7 out of 10, but I can only advise fans to play it. If you play Mass Effect 3 without the DLC, however, I am absolutely ruthless and I'm giving the game a 5 out of 10. Just a quick flashback about my history with Fallout. My first experience with the franchise was Fallout Tactics during a LAN party. Does anybody even do those anymore? I disliked it because I didn't understand the game's mechanics, let it put it simply. My second experience was Fallout 1, which I stopped playing after 2 hours because I absolutely did not understand the game. My third experience was Fallout 2, which I stopped playing after 1.5 hours because, honestly, I don't really remember why. My fourth experience was Fallout 3, which I stopped playing after 2 hours because I felt visually bored to death. Green, black, brown and grey, Normandy Bay as well as Bullet for the Brain. My fifth experience was Fallout 4 and that's on me. I didn't give the game a fair chance from the get-go. This was probably because of my dislike towards Bethesda Game Studios and how disappointed I ended up being with the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. And from what I've heard, I probably wouldn't enjoy Fallout 4 either. My sixth and most recent experience was Fallout New Vegas. The only game in the franchise that I actually finished. Took a total amount of roughly 80 hours to finish the single playthrough, meaning about 2 months of playtime, but I finally did it! I finished a Fallout game! Yeah! Unfortunately, I did not use any community patches or mods, meaning I played the bugged version and my experience as a whole was less than comfortable. I'm just saying this, 13 save file corruptions. Trust me when I tell you this. With said fixes, this is probably a fantastic RPG. It's also one that I'm probably never going to replay. The reason for that is actually the same as Fallout 3. I feel visually bored. The majority of the game is just empty wasteland without enough content to explore it. It also feels static and lifeless. You may say, yeah, that's kind of the point. But I'm afraid that I'm referring to something else. I'm talking about life. Nothing here feels really natural. Wind doesn't behave the way it's supposed to. There is no different weather whatsoever. Honestly, it doesn't even feel like a world that moves by itself whenever the player isn't close by. This is my biggest gripe about the game. Visual boredom, and it's too much for me personally. Okay, so now for the rest of the things. The gameplay is really fun, although a little glitchy at times. The main quest is there, but on the other hand, the side quests are absolutely magnificent. Some of the best I've ever seen in a video game. Once they actually work, of course. Please do yourself a favor and install community patches. Lastly, the amount of options and how you can build your character is enormous. There is a ton of replay value here. I'm pretty sure that until you've seen everything in the game, you need about 4 playthroughs at least. When it comes to the 4 DLC campaigns, or in other words the downloadable content, then my verdict is actually pretty clear. I dislike 2 of them. I only really like 1 of them. And the last one is just, it's good, but it's not exactly something I would revisit. It wasn't that much fun to me. By the way, big shoutouts to my boy, Johnny Guitar. You know, it's been months since I played the game, but this song has become an earworm. It played so damn often. Overall, I give the game a 5 out of 10 and recommend it for fans. For the official version. With mods and community patches, it's easily a 7 out of 10. Probably even higher. And I really recommend you to at least take a look. A replay of the first No More Heroes game. I played the Switch version, which is by far the best port of the game I played so far. I mean, it's far superior to the Wii original, or even the PlayStation 3 port. Incidentally, my opinion has not really changed either. It's a hidden gem of a game, with an extreme sense of humor, an interesting story with a great protagonist, as well as an action combat system with a bit of fun variety in between. You play as Travis Touchdown, a psychotic assassin living in a rundown apartment in the American city Santa Destroy, who also bought a lightsaber on eBay. In return for a fine piece of ass, he agrees to climb the rankings of the top 10 assassins of the world, but as the game progresses, it turns out that his actual reason for killing is a whole lot more personal. Okay, so long story short, the soundtrack kicks ass, the combat works real nice, the story is a lot more interesting than you may initially believe, and Travis Touchdown is, for very good reason, a fantastic protagonist. 8 out of 10 and I recommend the game. If you ever wanted to fist your sibling, this is the game for you. Monster Under Rise inserts sexual innuendo about courageous genitalia rising to meet monstrous challenges. I'm really not a big Monster Hunter guy. I'm the guy who spends several hours just exploring, looking at details and trying out my options. To be honest, I would actually say that hunting monsters was the least fun part for me in this game, so trust me when I say this, I really wasn't the demographic for this game. All in all though, I like the Rise. The combat is fun, the soundtrack is great, and the gameplay loop is addicting. However, I don't like the new reworked weapon system. In fact, there is no weapon in the game that I actually really enjoy using. Thing is, I did play some classic Monster Hunter titles back in the day, and I loved the hunting horn. I don't anymore. And finally, I think I would have enjoyed a story that had a little more nuance than a porn script. 6 out of 10 and I at least advise you to take a look. The game is on Switch and PC. I docked 1 point off for its unfinished release version, and no, I do not tolerate that bullshit. I take 1 point off for very wonky hitboxes at times. 1 more point is taken off due to the lack of variety in content, because I could swear previous Monster Hunter titles had more variety. In missions, to be precise. With that I mean that not every single mission was just go there, kill that. And the final point is taken off due to its story. No More Heroes 2, Desperate Struggle. Same situation as with the first game. I played the Switch port, and I found this improved version to be a little more difficult because the frame rate is actually stable now, contrary to the original Wii version. Overall, No More Heroes 2 is a good sequel with an even better soundtrack than the first game in my opinion, but doesn't quite compare in the story or general gameplay. It is still a very good game though. Once again, I give the game a 6 out of 10, and if you like the first game, you'll probably enjoy this one too. Return of the Obra Dinn is a really good investigative puzzle game. I relished every minute I spent solving it, and I loved the design of the game as well. The 2 major issues I can think of are that the music is reused a few too many times, which could make it annoying for some people, and the desired terminology to solve the puzzle is a little misleading at times. So let yourself be swept away by the ghost ship Obra Dinn and experience its history. I can't really say too much because the most enjoyable part of a puzzle game is the puzzle itself. So I give it an 8 out of 10 and I consider it to be a must play. Not because it's innovative or revolutionizing, but because we haven't had a great puzzle game of this quality for quite some time. Also, if you look up the solution on Google instead of figuring out yourself, I sent you a cut of monkey paw, you bat. Frankly, No More Heroes 3 is almost exactly what I wanted it to be. A sequel to No More Heroes 1. In direct comparison, I found the world exploration of the first game to be a little better, as well as the journey to 100% completion. However, the combat system, the magnificent soundtrack, the story and the humor are on point in my opinion. No More Heroes 3 suffers from frame rate problems, that is true. But it's nothing that would prevent you from finishing it or playing the game. It's quite literally the same situation as it was the case with the first game. It's a really good and solid game all around. Some minor glitches in the combat system, the aforementioned minor technical hiccups. But while these certainly impede the game's quality, once again, it's nothing that would detain from your enjoyment, at least in my opinion. It's a really good and solid game all around. If you've been looking for a game that reminds you of a game that would have released in like 2006 or 2007, this is the game you are looking for. I would not recommend finishing No More Heroes 3 to 100% completion though. For that, the game has too much copy and pasted side content merely intended to stretch your playtime. But other than that, just playing the main story, doing some side content whenever the opportunity presents itself, you're gonna have a very good time. Overall, I give No More Heroes 3 a 7 out of 10. But I can only recommend it to fans of No More Heroes. If you haven't played No More Heroes before, then you should start with the first game. Now let's hope it won't take another 10 years for the fourth game. Are you fucking serious, Robot Entertainment? This is what I waited years for? I pre-ordered Orcs Must Die 1 at the very beginning after you had to close your previous studio, and I loved the game. A fun tower defense game where the playstyle is left to the player and the main focus is just pure frantic fun for once? Count me in! I'm serious, until Orcs Must Die 1 was released, I was a fan of tower defense games, but I never truly enjoyed them. Until this game. The formula of this game gave me exactly what I want to see in a tower defense game. As ironic as that may sound. Orcs Must Die 2 came out not even a year after and does exactly what the first game does, but more. Once again, it was great, and this time it had two-player co-op with which I had a lot of fun. Then, Orcs Must Die Unchained, a PvP MOBA game with microtransactions and a tremendous lack in content. I still played it. I really enjoyed this style of PvP MOBA, this mixture of Smite and tower defense games. And then you, Robot Entertainment, killed the entire PvP system and replaced it with a PvE Horde system. Alright, you lost me as a player there, but I understood why it happened, until you killed all the servers for good and made the game inaccessible forever. Thanks for that, by the way. It's not like as if it was the better game. Now, you release Orcs Must Die 3 in 2021 for PC, and it turned out to be mediocre. At best. The level design is subpar, the writing is by far the worst in the entire series. In fact, it breaks the entirety of the pre-established lore just for some really bad fucking jokes. And honestly, I struggle to find redeeming features here. The art design looks generic as hell and no longer has the same charm as the previous games. The gameplay attempts to dictate your playstyle, so here's a heartfelt fuck you on that immediately. And the enemy variation is the most lacking of all the games. Honestly, the only thing that was improved in my perspective was the soundtrack, and that's arguable. Okay, so here's the thing, right? Orcs Must Die Unchained, the better of the two games that you literally killed, had 4-player co-op, and overall significantly more content than this third official game. Can I just ask you a question? Why didn't you just take Orcs Must Die Unchained and all its content, repackage it into the more classic format and make it single-player friendly? Why didn't you make Orcs Must Die 3 out of that? It would have saved budget, time, and everything else. It would have definitely ended up being better than whatever the fuck this game is. And here's something even better. Since Orcs Must Die Unchained flopped due to low player numbers, the actual repercussion for repackaging the game wouldn't have been noticeable, or barely noticeable. You literally got a free pass and threw it in a garbage bin. I'm giving the game a 4 out of 10. Please avoid it. Play the first two games instead, please. They're cheaper, they're better, and they're more fun. Do I even need to say more? 19 years and many funerals later, the cliffhanger of Metroid Fusion is finally resolved. Quick backstory. I played every single Metroid game with the exception of the Metroid 2 remake on 3DS. I also have not finished Metroid Prime Hunters. Are we good? Good. So, Long story short, this game is everything I wanted and everything I waited for. It's a 2D Metroid game, and that should already tell you everything. It's kinda its own genre. If you don't know, you get thrown into a map, you get an objective, now have fun getting there by navigating a big labyrinth and by acquiring upgrades along the way. Frankly, I am impressed what the developers were able to accomplish here. It evolves while simultaneously improving the gameplay of Metroid Fusion. The story faithfully continues the overarching plot of the franchise as if it was child's play. This is the most impressive feat in my opinion because it doesn't even break lore once. Not even remotely. Whoever wrote the story knew exactly what Metroid was about. And I love it. The music is pretty good. The graphics and the animations in particular are great. The controls are just magnificent, and honestly I'm hard pressed to find anything fundamentally wrong with this game. The literal only nitpick I do have is that one particular boss enemy is reused back to back a few too many times, but that's literally it. I don't have any other complaints beyond that. I can't even think of any. So, being left with no choice and being utterly unable to criticize this game in any other way, I give the game a 9 out of 10 and I consider it a must play, even if you haven't played a Metroid game before. Also, here's the thing, right? I personally prefer 3D games in comparison to usually any 2D game. I think the only exception to that is Mega Man. Even with Metroid, that is the case. I usually don't enjoy 2D Metroid games. I didn't enjoy Zero Mission or the NES Metroid that much, to be honest. I didn't enjoy Metroid 2 for Game Boy. Super Metroid was good, but I have no desire to replay it ever. I'm also not really in the speedrunning scene for Metroid. Fusion I finished, but also it was kinda, I don't know, it kinda felt off to me. Like, I personally prefer Metroid Prime 1 to 3 to any of the 2D Metroid games, or any 2D game in general, and that doesn't only apply to the Metroid franchise, that goes to any franchise. Metroid Dread, to me, despite being 2D, is both critically and subjectively a 9 out of 10, so maybe that could mean something. I honestly don't really know what else to say about it without it derailing into a 10-minute love letter as to why I love this game. Metroid Dread is just a great experience, and if you have the chance, as well as the patience for this kind of genre, you should definitely get yourself a copy. I don't think you'll regret it. Replaying my favorite Grand Theft Auto game, I decided to use the Definitive Edition. Oh no, not that piece of garbage. I downloaded the Definitive Edition patch made by the Definitive Edition Project, a team dedicated to doing Rockstar's job by fixing their games for free and maybe getting sued by them in return. But man, this mod, this community-made Definitive Edition, this is exactly what I personally wanted from a GTA remaster. The best thing about it is, I didn't pay a fucking cent for it. Discs are for the win. Grand Theft Auto Vice City is pretty much exactly as I remember it. I love the story as well as the writing, I just wish there was more of it. The driving is great, but the general gameplay, like aiming and firing, is clunky. The selected music tracks for this game are the best within the franchise in my opinion. The optional content, like doing all the challenges or finding the 100 hidden cocaine packages, is as frustrating as I remember it being, but you actually do get some worthwhile rewards for them. Vice City is still one of those Grand Theft Auto games that feel like a video game first and foremost, with a vision and an idea behind it. I don't mean to bash GTA 5, it's a fantastic game, but I could never really get into it because it feels like I'm just along for the ride. In Vice City, I am the ride. I think the biggest drawback to this game still comes in form of bugs and control glitches that pop up from time to time, as well as the infamous instant death trap that is water. I give Vice City the original, not with mods, a 6 out of 10, and I still recommend it to anyone who is interested. Although I need to warn you that going for 100% is a very infuriating experience. But if you play Vice City with the aforementioned Definitive Edition mod, not the disgrace that calls itself an official product, then the rating shoots up to a 7 out of 10, still with the same recommendation. The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword HD, now with tongues twice as long. You may not know this, but I have played and finished every single Zelda game with the exception of Triforce Heroes, Hyrule Warriors, and I think one of the Orca games. My favorite 2D Zelda game is A Link Between Worlds. My favorite 3D Zelda game is Majora's Mask. Are we good? Nice. You do not know this, but I did write a review for Twilight Princess HD back in the day, and just like it was the case with that game, I do have some mixed feelings about this HD version. It's a linear Zelda game with motion controls. The story is nice, the art design looks good, the gameplay works despite everything, and it's probably, in terms of main plot, the longest of all Zelda games. The soundtrack is a masterpiece, and despite only having 3 biomes in terms of areas, the game tries to bring as much variety into it as possible. It constantly jumps from one gameplay idea to the next without sticking too long on either. No, but seriously, let's go back to that soundtrack for a little while. Just listen to this stuff. I'm not gonna lie to you, this soundtrack has been on my MP3 player for the better part of 11 years now. I do really enjoy it. However, my biggest gripe with Skyward Sword is its progression, or rather, its speed. This game is slow, very slow, and on the Wii it could sometimes turn into a crawl. So then what about the HD version? Long story short, it's a bit of both. We lost a bit of the original charm and attention to detail. On the other hand, the HD version gives us some much needed streamlining. In this remaster, the progression is quicker, there are now optional button controls, and some annoying features have been downplayed or outright removed. These are all very good things. More good examples would include the improved frame rate, more controllability in general, less mandatory tutorials, less time spent in loading times and calibrating your controller, stuff like that. What we did lose was the aforementioned charm in detail. I could swear that the original had better draw distance and a better art style. The Wii version often felt like a painting, like an aquamarelle painting, which gave it a really nice flair. This is something that I felt was completely missing in the HD port. However, while I did have some minor glitches in my button controls, like the game being confused when and how exactly I wish to use my sword, I do not feel that either version is the definitive edition of the Skyward Sword package. Unlike other Zelda remasters like Wind Waker HD, which cuts a lot of unneeded fluff away and just generally aims to improve the entire experience, the main issue of Skyward Sword is still present. Unnecessary backtracking and slow progression. There is a feature that would have mitigated that problem, but... well, let's just say the developers noticed the same thing, included said feature and decided to sell it through Amiibo with limited availability. That feature being fast traveling. Okay, so, what the fuck? I consider this a vital feature to improve the game and you lock it behind a fucking paywall? Are you fucking kidding me? We're not talking about some nice little bonus like some unique equipment or a special difficulty mode. This is a vital feature that needed to be in the game, period. The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword, both original and the HD version, get a 7 out of 10, and I recommend the game to anyone who is interested, with a careful warning that out of all the Zelda HD remasters we've had so far, Skyward Sword HD feels the most lacking in comparison and, in my opinion, is definitely not worth $60 plus additional costs, not by a long shot. In my opinion, the entire package, including fast traveling may I add, should be $40 at most. Don't get me wrong, Skyward Sword is a good game. It is a very fun time, but it's not one without its caveats. If it weren't for the paywall in the HD version, I could have easily given it an 8 instead, but as it stands now, nah, not like this. When I first finished the original Mafia, I felt a little conflicted about the game. I loved the story and the writing in particular, but I found the gameplay, the shooting mechanics especially, to be really annoying. Although the soundtrack remedied a lot of that. It also had a bit too much fluff and content in my opinion. So, here's the remake, which fixes everything I disliked, implements modern third-person shooting mechanics, cuts a lot of the fluff short and focuses on its excellent writing for the most part. The only things we really lost were optional content and the soundtrack. But I didn't consider it to be a very high price. Perfect remake, 10 out of 10, flawless, masterpiece! No, just kidding, there are problems. There are glitches during regular gameplay that can make the new parkour and combat system annoying at times, but it's not anything that would hinder your experience. If I had two issues with the remake, it would be these. Not only optional content was cut short, many missions of the main campaign were also too streamlined, sometimes to a somewhat damaging degree in my opinion, especially when it comes to more details regarding the storyline itself. My second gripe would actually be the soundtrack. The original soundtrack included lots of songs from the 1930s, etc, etc, etc. This new remake, however, includes new songs that merely sound like they were coming from the 1930s, and that's a vile difference. Nonetheless, let me make this clear, this remake is one of the good ones, and I would rate it an 8 out of 10 with a definite recommended rating. If you get the chance, check this game out. De Novo has already been removed. It is a fun time, it is enjoyable. You should be finished in about 5 hours with the main campaign, and honestly there's no reason to just not do it. It's an excellent experience. I can only recommend it. I also finished Pathfinder Kingmaker in 2021, and this was a huge unexpected surprise to me. It is a very long game, and one that came, for me, at a very good time, because I was in dire need of a game like this. Kingmaker has what I really love in video games: atmosphere. Something akin to a soul, love, in other words, immersive environments and details to commemorate them. You can immerse yourself for quite a while in Kingmaker, and considering it's essentially 7 tabletop RPG books combined into one game, you'll have plenty of content to go through. I'm talking 150 hours for a single playthrough kind of thing, or about 4 years of in-game time. And yes, before you ask and before we talk about the game itself, the story ending, depending on which choices you make, is actually pretty good as well. I cannot definitely promise that. My ending was really nice, but this is a game where, from the very first dialogue you have, your choices have relevance for the ongoing story, as well as the ending in one way or another. So, based on that, you may end up having an entirely different experience than I had. Anyway, you play as some guy or gal who picked up somewhere that an influential noblewoman seeks many adventurers for a most dangerous task. The game begins when you arrive there. And that's already it. I really like this story because you are not some chosen one with a powdered divine ass for a head with spit made of wine and methane made of perfume. You are just the person who appears in that situation as the most competent, and due to circumstances, you end up being the only realistic choice for ruling a kingdom, whether you like it or not. Also, don't worry, the rest of the story is pretty good too. At least I felt engaged by it until the very end. Conspiracies, invading barbarians, neighboring kingdoms launching smear campaigns against you. Each campaign presents you with a new conflict, and it's really nice in my opinion. Utilizing the tabletop Pathfinder system, or just using the easiest difficulty if you don't want to bother with any of that, you bring your kingdom to prosperity or its ruin. It's all up to you. The combat system is extremely complex. It's not simple whatsoever, but don't worry if you're already smothered by menus. There is a difficulty mode where you could play a brainless ape and you'd still win in combat. There are nitpicks here and there about the combat system, but I think you should be fine. Now for the second part of the game. Kingdom Management. A micromanagement minigame that can't help but feel lackluster, especially since the campaign already has enough content. I personally did not mind playing this minigame, but I also enjoy Stellaris 3.2, also known as Micromanagement the Game, so to each his own. Even then, the manager feels rather lackluster in content and expanse. It attempted to combine a simple economy simulator with a CRPG, and while the result could definitely work, it ultimately falls short of competing with itself, if that makes any sense. It doesn't really feel like the systems are working in harmony. It sometimes feels like the systems are working against each other. All in all though, I do really like the game. Despite all its issues, I strongly prefer this game to Divinity Original Sin or its sequel. Also, once again, I really love the soundtrack, I'm sorry, but it feels like 2021, or at least the games I played in 2021 just had really nice soundtracks for the most part, not that I complain. I mean seriously, just listen to this and tell me you don't like it. The attention to minor details like equipped items, for example potions, showing on your characters is really nice. It's a very charming touch. The writing is good enough for what it wants to do. Honestly, the biggest temptation of this game is its massive campaign and replay value. And sometimes that is enough. It's just a little unfortunate that this game didn't fully understand that, because it would have been objectively better without its somewhat disappointing Kingdom Manager. Again, I personally did not mind using it, but I am aware of a lot of people that either have quit the game or wanted to quit the game whenever it appeared. One more thing you should be aware of is that there is a time limit in the game. I found the time limits to be quite forgiving, and as long as you keep some basic thought with it, unless you skip every text box of dialogue that tells you what to do, you shouldn't have a problem. What will cause you a problem though is the enemy balancing at the end of the game, which is complete and utter bullshit. And just do yourself a favor and just cheat your way through chapter 7, will ya? I don't know what the fuck the developers were smoking when designing that last chapter, but holy shit, did they hate the players. They must have really fucking hated the players to design the chapter that way. Overall, I give Pathfinder Kingmaker a 6 out of 10, and I strongly advise you to at least take a look if you have the patience for these kinds of games, that is. It is not a game for everyone. I am not claiming that it is. Kingmaker is a niche title, but one worth looking at. I'm talking of 4 points in total. 1 point for its awful release version, 1 point for minor bugs that pop up here and there, 1 point for the conflict between its two genres, and finally, some of the puzzles just suck. They're just so badly designed, but honestly, you have like 1 puzzle per chapter and 2 are mandatory, so really it's not a big deal. What is a big deal though is follow this advice. Do not skip the main story missions. Do them as soon as possible or you get a game over. You understand me? Nice. And so, here we are, all the games that I played this year, quickly reviewed in a short video. I originally wanted to write the script in a more humorous fashion, but for one thing, my humor right now is very dry. And additionally, it's about high time I get this video out. I'm like 4 months overdue behind my original schedule. My personal best game of 2021 is Metroid Dread, with No More Heroes 3 being shortly behind. For 2022, I have planned 1 more review thus far. Let me make this clear once again, I currently have no intention of establishing YouTube as a financial source, considering their hypocrisy and their standout ability to be utterly infuriating. Streaming is still a little too difficult for me to do right now. I can't really seem to get a few quiet hours in a row to actually record something. For YouTube videos, I can cut out those interruptions, no problem. For Twitch, that would be impossible, and I really don't want to deal with that hassle. With that being said, this is the end for now. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you had an enjoyable time watching it. If you have any disagreements or agreements or anything you want to say, don't be afraid to post them. I only delete insulting comments. Go rob a bank, visit a brothel, do whatever you want, and have a wonderful day.